You were a fractional before it was in before it was in vogue.
Yeah,
You were a fractional
absolutely.
executive before the term existed. Yeah.
Well, they used to call them interim management back then.
Yeah.
Now they use the term fractional executives, but yeah, that's what it was. And so,
Welcome to the CX and Culture Connection, the podcast for leaders who are looking to drive value from their investments in customer experience and culture together. I'm excited to be here today with Norman Wolfe, who is the author of a book that I really enjoyed, The Living Organization, and I'll let him share a little bit more about his background. Norman, thanks for joining us today.
oh, thank you, Matt. I'm really excited, and thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts with your audience.
It's great. We'll get to the book in a minute, which people can find the review of the Living Organization on the JourneySpark Consulting website under the What We Think page. Norman, do you want to share a little bit more about your background as an executive at HP and as a consultant, and kind of the journey you've been on and what inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, I'm happy to, Matt. Thank you. So I started as you mentioned, my major career was with Hewlett Packard. I spent 15 years with them from 1973 to 1988, which, looking back now, sounds like I'm feeling very ancient. So, um, and while at HP, I started off as a technical guy, systems engineer uh, in the sales region, working with customers and salespeople. And then my first management job was in customer service. Became a district service manager. And the reason that's important is it lays the foundation for what ended up being the rest of my life, which is uh, working in organizations I did not have technical expertise in, which forced me to learn the art and skills of leadership and organization. Continue my career through HP, taking on organizations that I did not have the technical expertise from. I didn't grow up within the organization. And invariably, they were organizations that weren't well performing. For whatever reason, I seemed to be the one that turned them around. So when it was time to leave HP, which was in 1988, I had all this background in skills in organization leadership, organization performance, or turnarounds. So what do you do with that if you want to be an entrepreneur? You become a consultant. And for the first part of my consulting career, I was what I call opportunistic consulting. I ended up taking jobs. I meet people like you and I met, and we talk, and they'd have this challenge, and I'd share my background. They said, "Do you think you can help me?" And lo and behold, I'd have a new engagement. So it got me the opportunity to work in many, many different disciplines, from sales to process improvement, IT, um, mergers and acquisitions, obviously turnarounds. Uh, did a lot of different kinds of consulting. Over the course of that period of time, um, I began to notice the difficulty people have in actually getting things done. And so I became very curious about it, not only in terms of my consulting, but in my own life. I mean, we all have goals and desires, things we want to achieve. And how do you actually make that happen? I'll share one little story that had a big impact on me. I was getting ready to, I was doing my annual planning, as we all do. I look back over the last 12 months. What did I said I was going to do, and what did I accomplish? And there was one goal I established the previous year that I completely forgot about. That wasn't on my mind at all during the year. And yet I exceeded the goals I set in that particular objective. And it dawned on me that, wait a minute, something's going on. This happened without literally any effort. It was almost like magic, right? It just showed up as a phenomenal result. And that got me to thinking, how do we create outcomes? How is it that sometimes I struggle, and maybe get something done, but it's really tough. And other times, like this one experience, things happen like magic. I set the goal, I forget about it, and a year later, I'm exceeding that goal. As I tend to do when I get curious about something, I start diving into lots of different theories, trying to understand it. So I explored every possible field of human endeavor, from quantum physics on one hand to Jungian psychology on the other, from motivation to spirituality, and always with this curiosity, what can I learn about how do we create outcomes? Okay, fast forward now, it's about 2001, 2002. I have a lot of experience working with a lot of different clients. Sometimes I take a position as a chief operating officer or a general manager or president of a company for an interim period of time.
You were a fractional before it was in vogue. Before it was in vogue.
Yeah,
You were a fractional
absolutely.
executive before the term existed. Yeah,
Well, they used to call them interim management back then.
yeah.
Now they use the term fractional executives. But yeah, that's what it was. And so in 2001, one of my clients asked me to join his board. He was a NASDAQ public company. And as I'm thinking about all these experiences and going back into the consulting world again, after doing a stint with a startup, um, I asked him, why do you keep hiring me as a consultant? And he said, Norman, it's easy. You help me execute faster. And that became a trigger for me in realizing that that's something I've always been focused on. How do we execute more effectively? So in 2002, I started up Quantum Leaders, which is my current consulting company, and began asking the question, how do people go from where they are to where they want to be? We call that strategy execution, but it's really simply a journey of I'm here and I want to end up there. And how do I do that effectively? I was in a conference with a friend and she asked me the question, what do I do? And I explained, and she said, what makes you different? And my response was, well, I think of an organization as a living thing. It's got a soul, it's got a purpose, it's got energy, it gets excited, it has belief systems. And she goes, wow, you should write a book. Now I have to tell you, she was an editor. So to her, everybody should write a book. But she said, write a book. And during that conference, it kind of planted a seed. And I think it was about a year or 2 years later, I said, I'm going to write this book. So 6 years later, the Living Organization was written and published. And that set me on a whole nother journey, which is what I'm on right now. But that's how I got there. And it really is asking the question, how do we more effectively achieve the goals we've set out? How do we take that journey from where we are to where we want to be?
In the book, The Living Organization, you actually use the metaphor of a magic trick. You talked about magic a couple times in the last couple minutes. And you use this story about a magic trick to illustrate the need to shift beyond industrial age thinking. That magic is what people can't explain. Can you share what you mean with our audience?
Well, yeah, so in my many endeavors throughout my life, I was a professional magician for a while. I was fascinated with magic, and magic is really the idea that something is happening that we can't explain, like that experience I had, right? We see something and it goes beyond our normal thought process. It doesn't fit into what some people call our paradigm or our frame of reference of how the world works. There's a statement out there, I can't remember who actually said it. I want to say it like Isaac Asimov. Technology, very advanced technology, is indistinguishable from magic. And the reason we look at it that way is because it's unexplainable. We don't understand, it doesn't fit into our paradigm. When I looked at that experience I shared and others like that throughout my life, I began to realize there's something else happening that makes it feel like magic, but it's only magic because we haven't yet understood it. And so what I did in the book was explain what's going on under the uh, under the magician's cloak of invisibility, so to speak, right? What's happening behind the curtain, right? So that makes the magic happen. There's something going on. Now, when you understand the magic trick, you go, really? It's that simple? And that's one of the reasons magicians never share the secret. It's not that we don't want you to know it. It's that once you know it, it's no longer magical. It loses that kind of magical quality to it. So I decided to reveal the magic in the living organization. And the magic really comes down to there are forces operating that will facilitate the creation of our goals or get in the way of them. And it has a lot to do with our thoughts, our belief systems, our attitudes, our context is the term we use. You can think of it as our paradigm, our framework. Any of those words apply to what is it that is creating the way we respond to life and how life responds to us. So that's what I mean by the magic.
That's magical. When I was reading the book, what really connected with me personally, Norman, is and this I want to say to the audience, this, and I said this in my book review. This is probably the best book I've read that it brings to life why culture and customer experience go together so well because of the way energy flows in an organization. And Norman does a really good job in the living organization of talking about not just why an organization is not a machine, this is the paradigm shift, but that an organization is a living entity with a purpose, and then people are part of that organization, the cells in the organization in your metaphor, but that energy flows, just like energy flows in a human being, and culture facilitates or hinders the flow of energy. When people talk about culture eating strategy for breakfast, what they mean is that the behaviors in the organization actually act in a way that prevents potential energy from becoming kinetic energy. The energy doesn't flow, it gets bottled up. And that if the behaviors are good, everything is so easy. It's like swing and rowing. I rowed for a year, that everyone seems completely in sync, and it's a magical experience. Do you want to comment on the difference between activity, relationship, and context energy, the three types of energies you talk about in the book?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And uh, the notion of energy became the foundational principle that I was using, or I still use, when I think about how do we create outcomes. So it started with the principle that everything is energy and energy cannot be created or destroyed. That was my starting point. And that led me to understand or accept that if I'm going to create something, I'm really only transforming energy from one form to another. You can think of it as I'm transforming energy of thought, which is an energy, right? That your thoughts are just energy, into a physical manifestation of that thought. That's going from vision to implementation or realization of the vision.
When we turn insights into action, that's actually what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so and so I began to look at, okay, so what is the energy that I'm playing with when I'm doing that? Now, clearly, the one everybody naturally assumes is the most important one is doing something, right? And we have to do stuff. We call that the activity field of energy, and that's everything from setting goals to drawing the diagram of the project I want to build, to cutting the wood, to nailing it and painting it, and all the activity I'm going to do. And then I began to add on to that this concept of relationship energy, because if you think about it, I mean, you hear the statement, high performing teams outperform other teams. Well, what makes high performing teams? And we talk about things like high performing teams are synergistic. 2 + 2 = 5. Well, what does that mean, 2 plus 2 equals 5? If you look at it just purely from an energy point of view, it's saying that the energy, which you can think of as a sine wave, of people who are in phase, as you said, when you're rowing and you're in sync, there's something magical happens there, right? And that magic is this amplification of energy. People become more alive. 2 plus 2 equals 5. All that is 2 sine waves in phase amplifying itself, talking from a purely, physics engineering perspective. But it's really what's going on. So take the opposite. Organizations or people in conflict are like 2 sine waves or 2 energy fields out of phase, and they're attenuating each other. We call that an energy drain. We feel exhausted. We feel tired. I mean, literally, we lose energy. So I said, okay, so we got activity, doing stuff, and then we've got the energy associated with the interactions or relationships we have. So those are the 2 fields. And then I said, there's a third field, and this is really where a lot of the magic happens. It has to do with we call it context. You can think of it as belief systems. The reason I use the word context is if you look up the term context, it's that which gives meaning to that which is around us. Putting a word in context means that you're giving a stage or a meaning for what that word might mean, right? And so we use the word context to say this is the frame of reference I use to take actions and to have relationships. You can call it belief systems, you can call it worldview, you can call it paradigm. It's sort of the same principles. The thing about context energy is it's a defining energy. I will respond to you in relationships based on my frame of reference of what you said and did means to me. So my relationship is going to be impacted by my context. If I feel threatened by you for whatever reason, you may or may not be threatening me, but if I feel that way, I'm going to respond to you in a defensive way. And so that defensiveness may set you off, and now we're in conflict. How do you clean that energy up? Same thing with my activity. If I believe something is possible, then I will pursue it. If I believe it's not possible, for whatever reason, I won't pursue it, even though that might be my best course of action. So activity, relationship, context, 3 fields of energy that play together in a relationship where activity has a linear impact on our outcomes. Relationships impact activity, and so has a significant impact, but context impacts both of them, so that's the driving force. And that's also where the magic happens.
Yeah, there's so many layers to this, like a good
I know.
collage. You can always add layers to a collage, and you can see all the connections. And my mom's an artist, so I love to talk about collage. And you and I have talked about that. Um, so one theme I'd love to pick up on a little more is how, when to relate this to how people often talk about culture, which you and I both know is how things are done around here. But, and we're talking about how to spread the right behaviors. Now, culture, to step back a second, is actually more than behavior. Behavior is critical, but it's also the mindsets, the skills, the relationship networks, and the behaviors all go together. And what's powerful for me is your approach with energy talks about how things flow, how you build that community, how you build that grow the energy of all the people, because the people are the source of the energy in the community. And the behaviors are key, the activity, but if the relationships are not good, and if the skills actually help you do things with less effort and do things better, which also helps increase energy, you talk about that in your book. And then the mindsets is actually critical. And it's really hard to change mindsets. And a lot of people talk about, commitment, consistency theory, and behaviors and habit building, and that's true. But you actually tap into purpose and the soulful purpose of the organization as a way of getting people to want to change their mindsets.
Yes, so you touched on, like you said, a collage. There's lots of layers on layers. Let me start with a simple analogy. We know that, and this goes to what you said, if I want to change outcomes, if we are collectively achieving a certain set of goals, it could be a certain market share or a certain kind of customer experience, and we want to shift that to a different outcome, a different customer experience. We know we have to behave differently. That's there's that famous saying, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different outcomes is insanity. So expecting to do something with the same old behaviors is pretty insane.
That was Einstein. So you're in good company.
Yeah, yeah, that's one of his favorite quotes. Um, well, if you recognize that my behaviors, I'll say 90%, I think it's higher, of our behaviors is literally unconscious responses to our environment. Then the question is, what's driving those behaviors? Well, in our model, it's what we call context. It's that set of beliefs I have that have been created over my lifetime that tells me if this happens, this is my best response to it. And my best response is the response that's either going to make me feel safe or lead me to successful outcomes, or a combination of both. Typically, it's a combination of both. I want to be safe and successful. So I build up this set of beliefs about when this kind of event happens, when a person says this is how I respond. If that's the case, then if I want to change my behaviors, I have to change my underlying context. And when you bring that into an organization, as you said, culture is the collective set of behaviors. But culture comes out of the context. And context is really a set of stories we create that tell us how to behave in a way that makes us safe and successful. But those stories become unconscious. And why they become unconscious is sort of like, okay, I programmed the operating system, and now when the stimulus happens, my body, my mind knows how to respond. I don't have to think about it. That's what makes us highly efficient in the world. There's a statement by sports figures that you have to practice it 10,000 times. Well, once you practice it 10,000 times, you stop thinking about it. Ask a great tennis player, how does he do that serve? It'll take him a long time to figure that out. It's almost like reverse engineering something. He practiced 10,000 times and completely forgot. Well, the same thing happens with people. It happens with organizations. This is one of the reasons we call it a living organization. What I discovered is collectives of people actually operate like a single individual. So all the principles of human behavior apply to collective behavior. So organizations have their own collective context. So if I want to change the organization's outcome, I got to change its behavior, but to change its behaviors, I got to change its context. And you can't change context by addressing activity alone. You got to go right into the core of it. What is the underlying story that's causing us unconsciously to behave this way? I'll give you a practical example. I have a client who is shifting. It's in the commodity business, and they want to shift from a commodity-based model, which is, as you know, all around efficiency and price competitiveness, to an experience-based model. How can we increase the value of what we give clients? I was talking to the VP of sales, and he said to me, we had a situation where there was a very difficult client situation, not by the fault of the client per se, but the situation was, and everybody had to jump through hoops to satisfy the client. At the end of that, everybody inside the company was complaining about, we should just drop this client. He's a pain in the butt, and he caused us all these problems. We should just drop the client. And the vice president of sales said to me, Norman, it seems odd to me that we talk in these management meetings about customer experience, and here we are treating customers like they're a pain in the butt when they have a need for us. And I said to him, exactly, there is the problem with most changes in culture is we are responding to it. Now, these are people who have been conditioned through the collective experiences that what makes you successful is efficient operations. Right? We get our processes done efficiently. So in that model, a customer with a challenge interrupts my efficient processing. So now the customer is a problem for me. Change that story and saying, and this is what I told the VP of sales, you have to get everybody together and say to them, wait a minute, we just shined in the eyes of the customer. We just enhanced that customer's experience. This wasn't an interruption. This wasn't a pain in the
It's
butt.
the power of perspective. You're talking about the power of perspective, the way they experience that. Actually, they're conditioned to experience a certain way, and they react within that context. If you shift the context, if you shift the context to this is actually a customer signal, the customer's giving you data, and you're responding to it, and you're actually creating something of value to the customer, the story becomes different. But they have to be able to. So without addressing the context, which is mindsets and the culture framework, you can't have a lasting change in behavior or vice versa.
That's right. And it's not just, I mean, people talk about shifting mindsets, but they don't talk about how to do that. And the way you do it is just the way I explained. You change the story. You take a situation and said, wait a minute, this isn't an interruption. This is an opportunity for us to shine. This is what we want to do more of. And once people begin to recognize, oh, that's the way I behave, now you're shifting context, i.e., you're shifting mindset, i.e., you're shifting behaviors.
Yeah, I've always used a phrase without realizing the really powerful meaning of it fully in my career as a consultant, which is consulting is a storytelling process. That what you're actually doing is you're listening to stories, you're understanding the context of the stories, and you're rehearsing and telling stories and unlearning about how to drive change. But you're constantly rehearsing and telling stories and figuring out. And the process of building insights is actually storytelling. You're building hypotheses, you're telling stories, and you're trying to understand the stories people tell, which is getting in their minds. So building insights is discovering the stories people use.
I couldn't agree with you more. And if you think about it, the nature of the human species that differentiates us from any other species, is we are story creating species. That's unique to us. We tell stories. Joseph Campbell, he talks about myths.
Well, the ability to forecast, the ability to create tools. I was listening to the radio and I heard someone talk about, like, if you watch a gorilla and they'll use a tool, and it'll be very fundamental primitive use of a tool, but they will use a tool, but they will never bring it with them. They will never actually. So you can give a gorilla a bag and they'll play with the bag and they'll put something in it, but they will never take things with them in the bag. Whereas human beings tell themselves a story about the future. They create a tool. That's what innovation is. It's stories about the future.
It's a story is about the future. I often say, a tree will always be a tree. It's one of the things I differentiate living system theory from living organization theory. Living systems theory, tries to make humans and therefore human organizations act from a point of view of nature. Well, living systems are um, defined by the genetic code. Yeah. Humans are part of the living system species, the general, right? We're living systems. We have a genetic code and we operate certain ways based on it. But a tree will never learn to fly. A bird will never learn to swim. Um, Humans have a phenomenal capacity to say, wow, I want to fly like a bird. And they figure out how to do it. I want to swim with the whales in the ocean, and they figure out how to do it, right? We can exceed our limitations of our physicality. We transform our genetic coding and the limitations of that and no other species can do that. That's the power of innovation, as you said.
Earlier in the conversation, you talked about your inherent interest in multidisciplinary thinking and how you interested to physics, psychology, economics, philosophy. That definitely came through in the book, and in all our conversations, I really enjoyed that. I value that range of perspective myself, and one of the things I just want to share, people can see this online in the What We Think page if they want to go under articles and look for the social life of brands. And this is something I feature in my upcoming book, which has the same name of the podcast. And Norman's book, by the way, is one of the book reviews I feature in the book. I included it among a handful of books that I'm showcasing at the end of chapters. It's one of my top favorites. In the social life of brands, you talked about unconscious thought and the way people, what motivates and drives people. I collaborated with a neuroscientist and wrote an article and a client about the four drive theory at Harvard, about the drive to acquire, defend, bond, and learn, and applied it to marketing, the social life of brands. And in the four drive theory, Norman, the idea is there are four equally powerful drives to acquire, defend, bond, and learn. That shows up very early in our months of being born. And what's really resonated for me was the drives to bond and learn are just as powerful in human beings. We're social animals. As the drives to acquire and defend. Like in economics, everyone focuses on acquiring wealth, acquiring status, acquiring something of value to you, or defending something. It's primal. But not enough attention gets paid to the bond and learn drives. And in fact, when we talk about organizational purpose, we talk about community, we talk about the context energy, the drives to bond and learn actually are enormously active in the way people engage with each other. It's just we don't naturally think about it enough in business and our production mindsets, but it's always there. And what's happening in digital is actually the drives to bond and work and learn are now digitized, whereas previously they were word of mouth, or they were training, or they were things that were physical, and now they're dominant in the digital experience, the drives to bond and learn.
Well, I agree with you. I use a slightly different model of what I call the innate human needs, and that I have three, not four. And I was just, as you were talking, thinking about how I can map mine onto those four. And they're very similar, though. My three are: every human being wants to have a sense of contribution. We want to have our lives mean something, right, in one form or another. And so a lot of the stories we create are how do we give our lives meaning. The second one is we want to learn and grow. That's very common. That's very synonymous with the learn part of your model. We don't want to, at the age of 30, I don't want to be a 15-year-old again. At least most of us don't. At the age of 70, I don't want to be a 30-year-old again. I always am looking to grow and learn and expand and do something different. And the third one is a sense of belonging, and you call that bonding. So yeah, I very much agree with those. And those three things is what makes human beings unique, and therefore collectives of human beings unique. Machines don't care about that. Machines only care about producing. So what that matters in the machine paradigm is, and I use the paradigm term because it's the way we've trained our leaders and our employees to think. Right? We've trained them to think you're part of this machine. You as the leader are the designers of the machine and the overseers to make sure the machine is working right. You employees, you are the component parts of the machine. And so you get your job to do, and I'll tell you what that is. That's the basic machine paradigm. And I don't blame anybody. It's the way we've thought for years. In fact, our whole system is based on that. You as a child, you follow the rules of your parents. Well, that's normal, natural at that stage of development. But then you go off to school, And even through college, you learn how to appease the authority figures, i.e., you learn how to take tests and pass those and give the professor what they need. And then you go to work and you figure out, what does the boss want? And that's what I give them, and that's how I'm successful. So we've created a whole way of thinking about how life works, and the machine mechanistic paradigm is throughout. But in many other fields of endeavor, whether they be the fields of spirituality, and I'm not talking about just religion, I'm talking about the underlying principles in all religions, or psychology or sociology, there's this whole other field of human endeavor beyond just what we do and how we please others. And so, yes, these three parts of what makes us human have to be addressed for people to want to change what they do. They have to feel a sense of belonging. They have to feel like they're given the opportunities to learn and grow. In the machine paradigm, you just take that one thing, learn and grow. Your role is to just perform this set of specs. And if you do that really well and you hone that skill, then you're successful. That becomes very boring after a while. There's no learning and growing doing the same thing over and over again. But there's no place for that true development. I mean, I develop you so you can do the skill, but I'm not developing you as a human being, as a living person who wants to keep expanding and growing and getting better, which is not just in my.
You're not unleashing the full energy of your organization. Far from it.
That you're doing the opposite unconsciously. Think about, here's a metaphor I love to use. Think about your organization as a child that you're growing and developing, right? Now, that child is 12 years old, and naturally, as a parent, you're going to give that child instructions on what to do because they don't have the experiences of how to do it differently. Now the child is 18, and you're still doing the same thing. Now the child's 22, still doing the same thing, telling the child how to navigate their life, what to do, how to do it. And the child is learning to depend on their parent to tell them what to do. Now the child is 35 and still living at home in the basement, asking the parents what to do, and the parents go, "What's the matter? You're 35 years old. Go out there." Well, whose fault is it that the child is still behaving in the way as a young child? We want our kids to do what they're told, so to speak. We give them the job responsibilities, and then we expect them to fulfill that. Right? And they've learned throughout their life to depend on the leader, the boss, to tell them what to do. And so then I hear from leaders all the time, why can't my people actually come to me with solutions? Why can't they think through? I've heard CEOs tell me, he's the VP of sales. He knows that position more than I do. Or he runs IT. He knows. Why is he coming to me, they ask? Well, that's like your child who was always being told what to do. Depends on you. So now you've created people who don't want to grow, who can't grow because they've never been told how to do it. And then you wonder why employees are disengaged. Well, the very thing they're looking for is growth and development. They're not getting it. So why should they, why should they? They're not learning. They're not growing. They're not developing. They're being treated like children. Nobody's going to be heavily engaged in that. So the very nature of the machine paradigm counters everything we say we want in an organization. And it's not done maliciously or consciously. It's just the design of the structure of the machine. It's the context of the way we think about organizations that is getting in our way. And like we said earlier, if we don't change the context, you're never going to change the outcomes. And so you got to fundamentally change that paradigm.
Norman, we could go on and on, adding more layers to the collage and discovering them. There's so much here. I really enjoy our conversations, and I really want to thank you for your time. And it was a pleasure to review the book and include it in among the book reviews in the CX and Culture Connection book. That'll be out by the end of October on Amazon. And look forward to continuing our collaboration. Now that I gotten to know you, I'm a collaborator by nature, and I really enjoy our interactions, and I'm looking forward to learning from you and continuing to do things together.
I am too, Matt, and I really appreciate this opportunity. And you're right, there's so much color and layers to this shift in paradigm. Perhaps we'll do another one, a follow-up in a few months. I would love to do that with you. And I look forward to future collaborations as well. It's pretty exciting.
I know you've sparked a lot of great ideas for me, and I hope you have for the audience as well.
Thank you, Matt.